Do you want to introduce the pod, Peter? Do you want to do the
Sure.
pod introduction?
Hello, hello, listeners. That's the dumbest pod
No,
introduction ever.
you're getting better at it.
You're doing
No,
great.
every
S-
time you do it, it sounds a little better.
Since we decided to start doing it, it just keeps getting smoother and smoother.
Yeah.
You're listening to Tired, the car podcast for people who understand that cars are bad. And my name is Peter Hughes. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Maddie Riley, Rory Carroll, and today we are joined by a guest, Mr. Kevin Williams. Welcome, Kevin.
How's it going, guys?
Good.
Terrible.
Awesome.
No, fine. I guess good.
It's awesome. Great to have you.
I mean, as far as just what I'm looking at on my screen in front of me with the four of us, that part is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything else seems to be going pretty badly, but
The horse
what can you
blinders.
do?
Just put the blinders on.
Yeah. So Kevin, you write for Inside EVs.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Yes.
You published a story earlier this year. No, it's 2025 now. Last year, in May of last year, um, titled "I Went to China and Drove a Dozen Electric Cars. Western Automakers Are Cooked." And this story kind of breached containment from the automotive, our little automotive world, and it seemed like a lot of people were kind of shook about it. And we just a few weeks ago kind of took our first real, not even a deep dive, but just not even a dive, just kind of like dipping a toe in the water of what's going on with the Chinese auto market and
Kevin,
Chinese manufacturers, and discovered that, wow, man, shit is crazy in China.
Kevin,
And
tell us about all the new friends that you made first from publishing that article.
From where?
All your new friends that you made on LinkedIn and on social media when you published that article.
Oh
Oh, boy.
man. Oh my God. Yeah, that thing exploded. Because you get all the viewers of on your LinkedIn. Of course, it's like a lot of people from car brands, but it's like weird people from car brands I've never heard of. More than just like the usual PR people that I talk to. Um, then there was like a couple that, because LinkedIn will not necessarily tell you everybody who looks at you unless you pay for it.
Oh, yeah.
But there were a couple people looking at it, and it says like works at U.S. State Department,
whoa,
and I'm like, well, we're here now, so whatever. I said what I said. So
And those people
I
are,
don't know. I don't know if they
are
want me to take
gener-
it back or if they're just like, they're because there were some when that piece came out, there were so many people that were convinced that that I was a state agent of China and that they're paying me directly, and I'm like, God, I wish, God,
Yeah,
I
I
wish
was
I
gonna
would
say,
have
what does that
so much
pay?
less
Just
debt.
what does that
You
pay
know,
out of curiosity?
I don't know, but I guess it's not enough because I mean, I'm looking at these creditors, man.
Yeah.
I'm
You're
pretty sure I'd be driving more than just like
you're still flipping
2013 Fiat,
you're
right?
still flipping Fiat 500s and
Right.
Rogues.
R-
Actually, I wanted to start off before we get into this. Kevin, can you just tell us a little bit about your background professionally before we get into, because you and I met
mhm.
like 2020, is that right?
That sounds right. Yeah, 2020
Yeah.
is when we met. That was kind of an interesting time in my life, actually. So I kind of fell into this writing gig, sort of. I know I keep calling it a gig, but I guess I'm paid to do it, right? But I originally started out as a political reporter locally in Columbus, Ohio. Um, Kind of freelancing. I was a Lyft and Uber driver for most of my undergrad years. Then I graduated college, got a job, and it was like really kind of terrible. So I ended up quitting that job and going back to Lyft and Uber driver while I started looking for work again. And then just kind of like the bottom fell out of Lyft and Uber. This was like, 2018, 2019,
Mm,
back when all that stuff was still in the news and we still cared about workers' rights a little bit. Um,
imagine.
You're right. So I kind of wrote a piece that went viral, basically talking about what it was like to be, a poor um, worker in like, a medium-sized city like Columbus, about how like, pretty much everybody, all of my friends, including me, we were just all working these terrible jobs that didn't do anything. And it just seemed like there was no future. Well, that piece went viral, and then I ended up somebody was like, hey, you ever thought about writing? And I'm like, that's not a real job, but whatever. Um, I really, that was my first reaction. I was like, no one is going to pay me for this, but whatever. You guys are gonna throw me a bone for some pieces, whatever. So I did like my first little big thing was actually it was for a nonprofit news organization, basically talking about how COVID was affecting low wage earners in the state of Ohio. Then I did some work around the George Floyd protests in Columbus here. And then political reporting is actually like really, really tiring. Like I would just come back from these little jobs and like be so exhausted. But then one of my car websites is like, hey, we're hiring. So I threw my name in the hat, and here I am now.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always liked cars, but it was just kind of like, well, this is also not a real job, but let me throw my name in the hat. And that was 5 years ago, almost 2020.
That
So
that was I remember that conversation, and your assessment is correct. I think when I first got offered a job writing cars, I was like, oh, that's not a real job. And I've been doing it for probably 10 or 12, maybe 13 years now, and my assessment has not changed. That is 100% correct. It is not a
yeah, so
real job.
I would like to. I think it's gotten a little more real, but I feel like I've
Yeah.
kind of made it real, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this big Chinese car thing was kind of like another viral post for you. It got you all kinds of attention. And I guess like just in the agent or in the interest of like explaining how that came together, so we don't believe that the State Department or the Chinese government reached out to you and were like, hey, we're going to give you $150,000 to write this post. How did that come together, and like what's the kind of backstory? Because it kind of, in a sense, it kind of started with VinFast, right?
Yeah, it did. It started with VinFast. I feel like one of the things I kind of every time I get irritated with the car writing industry, I'm like, okay, well, what kind of stories are we telling? Why are people keep saying the same four things without any sort of introspection or research into how we got to this point, right? Um, and yeah, it did kind of start with VinFast. Technically, I was still freelancing back then. I was doing like a permalance gig, where VinFast was really trying to make inroads here in the United States. So they kept having these brand trips to Vietnam to basically drive the car and look at VinFast facilities. And it kind of became like a running gag in the car riding world that like, it's like basically a paid vacation. I mean, even though obviously you're not being paid to go there, although it did come out later that some people actually were being paid. I was not. It was kind of like, well, you're just getting on the plane because you can spend a week in Vietnam. And I'm like, that's not really true. I really want to go because, this brand is like, they keep inviting people to Vietnam and they keep saying the same thing, like, oh, these cars are almost ready. And I'm like, okay, this brand says they're going to start selling cars in the United States within a few weeks. And I have yet to really learn anything tangible about the car, even when talking to their US PR people. So it's kind of like, okay, well, let me just go on the plane and see what the hell happens. And then I got there and it was a shit show. Like the cars were not ready. The brand was weird. I don't want to say authoritarian because that just feels like, very, that's not accurate, but it is definitely kind of like weird. They're kind of like operating on the behalf of the state possibly, but also at the same time, like, once again, I would ask questions and it seems like the more substantial the question you would ask them, they would just kind of get like a little scared or a little threatening.
Hmm.
And then I came
Now,
back and I basically it actually took me like 3 months to write that post that piece because I just kind of sat on the plane as I was coming back because I got followed by security in Vietnam. And then I drove the car and it was a hot mess. And like I kind of told their lead engineer who no longer works there actually. I was like, hey, this is a mess, and he got mad at me. We kind of had a back and forth. And this is like the first time I'd ever been outside the country.
Wow.
Hell
So
yeah.
I'm just like,
Big swing.
I'm just like, and I'm just like, I just wanted to ride on cars, and here I am thinking I'm gonna like get pushed into like the water and like drown, or
Right.
like ruin my career with like I came here and I tried to do real journalism, or whatever. But basically,
Kevin,
when I was coming back from Vietnam, I just kind of sat on the plane. I was just like, what the hell do I say? And it took me 3 months to figure it out. And then by the time I think it was like late December when I finally submitted it to Jalopnik when I was still freelancing, and I was like, you know what the hell? And then that one blew up.
and I will say, I think one of the big reasons that it blew up, and I don't know if you would say this, but your read on the car and like how ready it was for the U.S. market was pretty vastly different than most of our esteemed colleagues in the car journalism game, who seemed to be just wildly impressed with the car and the experience and in
Yeah, they
Vietnam.
were.
And yeah,
Mm.
it is
It made me second guess myself because at the time I think I'd only been doing this for like a year and a half.
Mm.
yeah.
So I was like, am I stupid? Like, did I miss something that everyone else is doing? And then I was like, then when I got home and really thought about it, that's why it took me so long to write that piece. And I was like, no, I'm just gonna go ahead and say what I feel. And then it turns out that I was right, because a lot of people, once again, they were all mad at me. It's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And then they had a U.S. launch 6 months later when they finally did
Right.
get the cars together, and everyone was like, oh my god, this thing's a hot mess. And I'm like, I told you.
Vindicated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think like in a lot of cases too, like everybody, I know this, everybody does kind of second guess themselves when they drive a car, when you drive a car, especially like if your opinion is way different than everybody else's, you're kind of like, like
Mhm.
did I drive it wrong, or was I in a bad mood or whatever?
Right. Was the car
And
broken? Because
yeah,
I even said that when I was in Vietnam. I was like, maybe mine was broken because the first time I
yeah,
drove it, I was like, oh, this is a mess. I was like, well, maybe this unit is a mess. I drove
yeah,
5 of them. I drove 5 of them, and they were all bad.
Mm.
yeah.
Statistically
I think
significant there. Yeah, I would think.
Yeah.
I think your piece though kind of gave everybody permission to say like, "Oh, this thing sucks," and
Yeah.
like, like I said, everybody, there's a tendency to kind of like, to try to, like I said, couch, and like you don't want to be the only one who's out there with like the singular outlier opinion, and so
It is.
everybody kind
Yeah.
of takes like a halfway position on it, and then when they saw yours, which was like, this thing sucks, it's bad, then everybody was like, oh yeah, yeah, that is the experience that I had. It was terrible.
Yeah. Which kind of also made me a little irritated too, because I'm like, you should just say it in print. Like
Yeah,
this person does not sign my checks, so I don't care.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know. Like
For
that's not why
listeners,
I didn't fly. This really was not a vacation to me. I mean, like I'm not gonna say I hate brand trips or like doing these press junket stuff, but I don't understand how people feel them as vacations, because like I'm busy, I'm working, I'm not sleeping,
Yeah,
not because I'm having fun, because I'm in work mode, man.
Yeah.
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 I generally do have fun when I go on them, but I do understand that I'm there to work. What were you saying, Peter?
oh, I just wanted to just pull out a little bit and just for listeners who are unfamiliar with VinFast, um,
Oh
this
yeah,
is a Vietnamese startup that is it like the richest guy in the country kind of
Yep.
deal. Yeah, he's
Hmm.
like a kind of like local billionaire kind of
Yeah.
uh, venture
It's a very,
capitalist guy who's I mean, he seems like a very much like an Elon Musk figure, in
yeah.
the sense that he's just whipping up all this kind of
Uh,
PR bullshit, and
Yeah.
and yeah, and uh, yeah, when people actually drove these cars, I mean, like I do I it's funny now that we're talking about it, I do remember that story, your story, and then I remember when people when they did the U.S. launch and people were driving them stateside, um, and describing like themselves like being like physically ill
Mhm.
The cars were like making
Damn.
people like nauseous, like where they would have to pull over and vomit
Yeah.
because of the suspension damping whatever was so fucked up that that it was just like
Yeah.
making people physically sick. And I like that must have been a bit of a vindicating moment.
It was crazy vindication because I once again
Yeah.
it wasn't me just like saying, oh, I don't like this car, because I feel like sometimes readers get confused with like me liking something to be my tastes versus something
Right.
being executed good or bad, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
cars I've driven that I don't particularly like, but like I'm not going to slam them because it's not to my taste.
Right.
But yeah, that was crazy vindicating because it was also something I'd said in Vietnam. I was like, this car's ride and handling is not finished. Like I remember going up to the lead engineer, who once again I guess no longer works there, and he says, "Hey, so how close of a product?" Because I was really trying to figure out why the hell I was there. Like, what am I looking at? And I went up to the lead engineer and says, "How close is this to what we'll get into the United States?" And what they told me was, "Oh, it's just a couple software tweaks away."
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
And I'm like, "Oh, you can't software away bad chassis and suspension management development here." And that's kind of why that kind of gave me the green light to like, okay, well, I'm just gonna say what I'm gonna say about this car.
Yeah.
Because if he would have told me something else, he would have said like, "Oh, well, it's not quite done yet, or we've got to do this or that yet," and I probably would have been a little nicer. But when he said like, "Oh, it's just a couple software tweaks away," and I'm like, "Oh, so this thing is done, and this is
Yeah.
what you're gonna give people."
Yeah, and I think the the epilogue to that, right, is like they did bring these cars to the United States, and they did put them on sale, and it was a major flop. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, they're now whatever new stock is available is selling for very, very little, and used ones are selling for basically nothing. They're kind of trying to give them away. So
Yeah,
it was
they've launched their second model, the VF9, the 7-seat one.
yeah, but it's
Only people I've seen
Yeah.
that drive it are influencers, so people who likely have signed a contract,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
who that literally can or cannot say things like by their contract. But I mean,
Yeah.
I know some journalists, they get mad at influencers, but I just kind of like, I don't mind them because fundamentally they do a different job than me, right? So
They're-
like, I mean,
they're hustling.
if they're gonna right, they're hustling. If they want to get their coin by being like a pseudo ad person, whatever, but they have to say things that I can't, or
Yeah.
So
They're, as long as they're not pretending to be a journalist.
some do, but
Yeah.
whatever.
Who names two names, Kevin? Just joking.
Oh my god, you almost got me.
Yeah. I know the guys that you DM me about.
Yeah.
But so VinFast, another kind of big public vindication. And then like, so who reached out to you to go to China first, and like what was that like? What was the
Yeah,
process
so
like?
I think VinFast and my first little taste of China actually happened the same year. So
Mhm.
right after because I just got laid off from the drive, which was really unfortunate, but
Mhm.
also at the same time, it kind of gave me a lot of freedom to be like, well, now I can say whatever. So I had gone to the Paris Auto Show that same year, and there's kind of like nothing at the auto shows anymore, except the Chinese. Like,
Yeah.
I had seen a couple Chinese cars, like like I've been writing about them a little bit for like years. I used to be on forums looking at them a lot. I used to get made fun of on forums because I like them. I was like, hey, this is kind of cool, and people were like, okay, whatever, CCP spy. But I'd gone to the Paris Auto Show, and I was with Mercedes-Benz for a Mercedes-Benz trip for like the new EQE SUV, which was a launch, which was a flop. Just kind of walking around the Paris Auto Show, looking at these like really surprisingly impressive products. Like I went to the BYD stand, and this is like the first time I got hands-on with BYD's actual models that they sell in Europe. So it was the Atto 3, the Han, and the Seal had just launched. And I was like, wow, these are incredibly threatening. Like this is not what I had been led to believe. These cars are significantly nicer than just pictures, like than what I saw in pictures. And there was a booth there where they were doing test drives for media who wanted to, take a couple BYDs around out on Parisian streets. So I got behind the wheel of an Atto 3, and that once again I wrote it up for Jalopnik, and I was like, wow, this is pretty good. There were some pieces about it that I thought were weird, but they felt more so weird than bad or poorly
Wrong.
made.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is really nice. But yeah, I have been posting on Twitter, and one of the English-speaking representatives for Geely, which is the parent company that owns Volvo, he would follow me on Twitter and was posting, and sometimes we would like have a little bit of interaction back and forth. And I basically kind of told him, I was like, hey, if you ever have like a sort of China trip, let me know and I'll go. Like, I'd love to be on it. And then I think February of 2024 is when I went. Or February was when when we made the plans. And he's just like, yeah, we're going to be doing a small media trip for international media for the Shanghai or Beijing Auto Show. Do you want to go? And I'm like, of course, hell yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty similar to what, a lot of other, vehicle media trips for auto shows or product launches. Like, for example, for CES, I went with Honda. Pretty common in the industry, for better or worse. I mean, of course, there's always a concern with this style of trip, but once again, very common in this industry.
It's funny that a friend of mine is, when I was editing Gizmodo, she's like a real journalist. She went to real J school, and she was like, one of the things that they teach you in journalism school is that you should never accept a junket or a gift or a trip or ever go anywhere on behalf of a company, but that all of that is different for automotive journalists. And I was like, that's so weird.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is that the case? And she's like, I don't know, they never explained it to us. It's like
right.
It's like,
right.
that's just the understanding.
If we held to those rules, the entire
The model
it would
would
fall
collapse.
so
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's
but
funny.
yeah,
I mean,
it was basically a press junket.
yeah. And I think the idea is like you have to go to a place to drive the car, and your publication cannot be expected to like foot the bill for that. I know like Wall Street Journal and some other publications, like they actually do have a travel budget built in, so that like they're flying on their own dime and then also staying at whatever five-star hotel, presumably on their own dime for that stuff. But it is the thing, right, that you do is someone brings you along, and that you have to like try to maintain your objectivity and your distance from the folks who are hosting you, which I think mostly happens, but
yeah.
Neither here nor there.
Yeah,
that's another episode.
Yeah, that is a whole other that is a whole, like, I just work here, man.
All right, so you go to China, and you come back with like this entirely different opinion of kind of like what the world auto industry looks like, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Like, I know like you are a little bit more knowledgeable, I think, than the average person going into it, but like how like going there and being there, like what were some of the things that you saw that were like, oh shit, like this, like specific things?
I think just how ubiquitous everything was, like as far as like electric vehicles, just how advanced everything was. So of course, I mean, I was on a media junket, so obviously their goal is to impress me with the cars, right? But I spent about 8 days in China for this first trip, and only about 4 of them were with the brand. The other 4 I was literally by myself, like walking around Beijing.
Wow.
Sick.
Yeah. Just kind of like me, no interpreter, no translator, no minder or anything. Because a lot of people think that I had like, some guy from the brand or from the government like looking over my shoulder to make sure I was in the right place. Like, oh, so I don't see anything, I don't need to. No, it was me and my little WeChat and my Alipay and a translated version of Didi, which is like, their version of Uber. And me just kind of strolling around Beijing by myself. And I think that's kind of when I learned the most, because like even though obviously there's a language barrier, you can just like looking back and people watching and just kind of like observing that people are using these things, they're excited about these things, they're buying these cars, They have infrastructure. Um, it was just kind of like, no, this is real. This is real here. This is not like
Yeah.
fake news here. They are doing these things, and they're not just doing it for you because they don't know who the hell you are.
Yeah.
This is
I
not.
guess like
Yeah.
our readers too, or our listeners will be like, what are the material differences? Like, okay, EVs in the United States versus EVs in China. Like, what is it like experiencing that and like being first person, like boots on the ground? Like, how is it different? I mean, that seems like a really elementary question, but like, let's talk about it.
I think once again, it goes back to just being how ubiquitous it is. Because like
Yeah.
here, of course, there are EVs in like maybe California or even where I live in Columbus, Ohio. There's a fair amount, but there they are literally everywhere. And I don't see anybody sort of complaining or upset that they can't have these vehicles or that it's too hard to make it work. I mean, I'm sure it does happen, but at least in Beijing, which I was told actually has a lower adoption rate of new energy vehicles. So that's like plug-in hybrids and EVs compared to like other big Chinese cities. They're still like everywhere.
So like, yeah, for me, it's like in Traverse City or like even New York or whatever, like you'll see maybe like 1 in 10, 1 in 20 cars is electric or hybrid. What is it like? What does that look like in Beijing?
I'd say in Beijing it's like 1 in 3.
Yeah.
In Shanghai it's way higher. In Shanghai it's like 1 in 2, I'd say.
Yeah. And then like, what is like availability of charging and like that kind of stuff look like compared to?
So it's kind of crazy because like Beijing's charging infrastructure was like a little more hidden and kind of not great compared to Shanghai. But one of the things that got me is, for example, I think a lot of Chinese cities now have it by law that if you do either ride sharing or taxi cab driving, they have to be new energy vehicles. Once again, PHEV or EV models. And I think I was riding in a Beijing branded cab, which is made by BAIC, which is like the Beijing something something or whatever corporation. Basically, it's the people who bought Saab back in the day.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. But they have these small cabs, or maybe compact car size cabs, and they have swappable batteries.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was walking around and ended up at a weird mall I didn't even know where in Beijing I was. I was literally just walking everywhere because I was looking for a BYD store and Apple Maps did not take me to the right place. But instead I walked into a battery swap station for those cabs that were running around, and it's just like a whole bunch of these cars lined up, waiting for their turn to swap out and then get back on the road and keep driving.
And how long does
And
that take?
I think for the Beijing cabs, like maybe 5 or 6 minutes.
That's so sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That always felt to me like kind of a more viable, if I've considered like what using an EV would look like for me or being in a more remote area or something, that always struck me as like kind of a necessary thing to just have built into that infrastructure as opposed to just charging. Like being able to just swap it and go just feels so much more approachable.
It is. There are definite concerns with it. Some people are not convinced that that's as environmentally sound as fast charging or slow charging. But I do like the swap model. But just once again, you go there and the fact that you can actually they have, because that's just one swap station or one swap, not alliance, what is it? Swap network. There are other brands that have their own. The fact that they're having that conversation and they're talking about swaps and they have the infrastructure for different models or even competing infrastructures, and we don't have that conversation at all in the United States.
Right.
Like we don't, I can't go up to an American or even an EV driver, even if they're an EV enthusiast, and have that conversation because they don't know what that is.
Right. Is there
They don't know how.
is there a conversation about making that like a kind of like adopting like a universal standard that
In China?
could
Oh yeah.
yeah
Like
Yeah,
cables.
actually, I actually did some actually did so I went to China again in November
Nice.
with the brand Neo, who they pioneered a lot of battery swapping. And they have like a whole swap infrastructure across China and a little bit in Europe as they start to expand into Europe. And they basically, I think they've done like 62 million swaps since their inception in 2018. But yeah, they actually have started I think they have a memorandum of understanding with a few brands to sign on to their swap network.
Oh.
I think I actually read a couple days ago, I think Cherry, which is another Chinese brand, they have 2 models that they said will be released this year that use the same batteries as Neo vehicles. So they will use the same charging station, their swap stations.
That's awesome.
So it's definitely, I mean, it's still, I mean, swapping is not necessary. There are some downsides with swapping, like, but at the same time, it's just kind of like maybe we could work with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I guess my question too would be like, tell me about, a lot of the story in China is like you're talking about a 5-minute swap, but like fast charging is very quickly catching up to that time.
Yeah, it
right?
is.
Like in China, like in the U.S. So like my car, Rivian is like, if you pull up to a fast charger, you want to go from 10% to 80%. That's like a 25 to 30-minute operation. Which like in that case, yeah, I'd much rather swap a battery. But in China, like that's old tech, right?
Yeah, I think Geely, well, Zeekr and Li Auto, they're kind of like battling for first place as far as like fastest charging EV.
Yeah.
I know Zeekr has their like golden battery, where it's like a 75 kilowatt hour or LFP battery that they put in their 007 sedan 001. I don't know if it's in the 001. Anyways, the 007, it can go from, they claim that it can go from 10 to 80 percent in I think 11 minutes.
Yeah. I wanna say
And then they also like made a sort of announcement at CES how they're working on the 2nd gen of golden battery, where they want to do that same 1080 sprint in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But also I think I even overstated the time with the swap. Like for example, so when I was with Neo, they actually had me do a swap on their new model, which is the Onvo L60. It's kind of a lower priced alternative to the Tesla Model Y. And I actually timed it, including maneuvering into the swap station. We dropped the battery and replaced it with a new full one for, I think it was 3 minutes and 34 seconds.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's and that's what I'm like, the time excuse, or like, oh, it's gonna, like that stuff in China does not seem to be a concern.
It's gone.
Like
right.
Yeah. Which is like, I guess how much of that too, you and I have discussed this, I guess, and like probably a lot of listeners are wondering too, like how much do you put down to like, I guess, like state involvement? Like in the United States, we have massive subsidies for oil. We have huge tax abatements for manufacturing of traditional gas-powered cars, and in China, they've invested very differently on a state basis. And
Have
like,
they?
yeah, I think that China's made bigger investments in battery tech and
I agree. Yeah.
in infrastructure than the United States. So I guess like that, I think, is one of the constant like things that I see from you is like people, responding to your stories about China and saying, well, yeah, but the government gave them a leg up. The government gave them a leg up in.
Well, how come we didn't?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, and
also
I think
like you were saying earlier, like some of these subsidies are really not dissimilar to what we're doing in the United States. I mean, of course, Chinese automakers, they're getting tax abatements or tax breaks from either on the federal level or on the province level. They're getting a lot of these incentives from local governments. I just don't understand why that's a problem. With an asterisk, like I'm not gonna be play dumb and act like that China doesn't have its finger on the scale here, but also at the same time, we're here now, so I don't know what you want us to do.
I mean, I don't know why it's so stupid to not have your finger on the scale is the thing for me.
I think we may be a pro finger on the scale podcast here. I think.
Yeah. And it's the other thing about it.
It's just putting your finger on the correct scale, on the scale.
That's
right, and that's what kind of gets me. It just feels like, I mean, it seems like China got a really good return on their investment here.
Yeah.
I can't. Maybe this is cynical, but I can't imagine if the United States had tried to do things in the same way. I don't think we still would have gotten the same level of return here.
Yeah.
Well,
explain that then.
Like maybe this is cynical, but I just feel like I see if we were to try to do some of the same, like, investments in infrastructure or investments in, companies themselves, with either handing them cash or giving them all sorts of tax breaks, even bigger ones that they do now have now. I just picture, like, all of this stuff going to greedy CSEC execs, and then we get like 2 half-ass cars, and that's it.
Yeah.
I have similar
Yeah,
concerns. I think, especially with the state of all the other infrastructure in this country, with it getting farmed out to, everything falling apart, nothing gets maintained, everything's getting bargained for by like lowest bid contractors. I worry that even implementation would go poorly here because of just how everything works.
Yeah. Like, I don't anticipate them actually being able to put their money where their mouth is, and like, you get this stuff done.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like again, Americans and like American industry is very happy to accept handouts from the government. I think like, we see all kinds of finger on the scale type activity in the United States. Like that's everywhere in every business. It's just like the Chinese have decided that this was a priority for them, and
Also,
decided
I
to
think
make it happen.
I think it's kind of annoying how we frame it as only Chinese brands taking it. A lot of foreign brands who wanted to be in China, who wanted to invest in China or make products there, they took a lot of that stuff too.
Yeah.
So
For sure. Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the JVs and stuff, like American companies going to China,
JVs, encouraging them to invest in China because China wanted to win.
Yeah.
They wanted to build up a healthy industry, a healthy manufacturing industry of vehicle manufacturing, and then of course, they pivoted to electric vehicles.
Yeah.
But I kind of don't know what to tell them.
Yeah. And like, what are the lines, I guess, from, I'll say your critics or your reply guys, like, what are the things that they like to harp on?
I mean, of course,
don't worry, they're not going to hear this.
Oh no.
I mean, of course, they talk about workers' rights, and I hate being glib about that because it is something that's very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
But at least from my perspective, I feel like that's a little bit of a dishonest, thing, because I don't think Western companies would care. I don't think they care about workers' rights.
Amen.
I mean,
Absolutely.
look how many of these brands are actively lobbying against unions.
Mm-hmm.
They're offshore in place. If the tariffs hadn't gone the way they were, they probably would continue to put vehicle production over in Mexico.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, not Mexico. Well, Mexico too, but China.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't buy that.
Yeah, it's not like every company is going to pay people the least amount that
least
they
they
can
can.
possibly pay them. Yeah.
No one
No
one in this country can lecture anybody about mistreating your workers or misuse of
Yeah.
labor or anything.
Yeah,
No
I
way.
thought it was funny that there's what was the thing last week where there somebody's building a factory in Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
And there was this big uproar because it was discovered that that some of the workers that were being employed by the company that they had contracted with to build this factory were living in kind of slave-like conditions and like really
It might be
awful.
BYD.
I think it was actually, yeah.
And that's like that's a cause for concern. That's bad,
Sure, right, but I saw on a couple of just Chinese automotive related stories, commenters just saying like how anti-slavery they are and blah blah blah, and it's like people forget that it's like, yeah, Hyundai was just discovered like last year, like employing underage like workers
Yeah.
in Alabama. Was it
Right?
Alabama?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
exactly.
Alabama, which is
It's like,
Mhm.
come on, man.
Yeah.
It's
right.
yeah.
I don't think we should cover over in the sins of any sort of brand or corporation for mistreating people, but also at
Yeah.
the same time, I just want people to be honest here.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing too is like this is the same line that you get from, this is like a State Department thing where it's like, oh, China has a bad record on human rights. It's like, you live in the United States.
Who is
You live
fighting the
in the-
wildfires in California
I
right
mean,
now?
no,
God damn
but
it.
it's like-
It's the
isn't
country.
we literally have people who are undocumented holding up our whole agriculture industry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah. And I think like you know, like the beyond that, like no one has a worse record on human rights and you know,
Well,
global.
and also, and in terms of punishing corporate malfeasance,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, in this country, you know, CEOs get away with murder every fucking day,
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
China, like,
They'll
like
kill you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
they will
Literally.
Yeah.
execute you. You get
Yeah.
the fucking death penalty.
Yeah.
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 um,
Yeah.
if you're found to you know be doing stuff for profit that is harming people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are actual consequences for people with you know with wealth and power.
So
Imagine.
so let's
Yeah.
talk we like the last episode we did, we talked like just in really general terms, and we talked through a few like makes and models of Chinese cars. I think like
Mhm.
one thing that we didn't get into like deep dive tech stuff as far
Okay.
as like capabilities. And then like so what are the cars that you saw over there that you were like, hell yeah, like this would rip
Oh,
in the United
man.
States? Like I know we talked about the Zeekr mix, and I know like you have a great walkthrough video. I saw one in person at
CES.
CES. Yeah. And it's like whatever. Would that car sell 1 million units every year in the United States? Like people hate vans here, whatever.
No.
But it is so rad. It is so cool.
We're big mix
Like
fans.
from a
Yeah,
styling
actually,
standpoint.
I have a drive that I'm actually working on after I get on this after I get off of this call. I have to fix my first drive. So they let me drive it in China.
Oh, cool.
Oh wow.
By happenstance, I was on a different trip, and the English speaking PR guy hit me up on WeChat. He's like, "Hey, how long you got till your plane leaves?" And I'm like, "I don't know, maybe like 5 hours." He's like, "You want to try some cool stuff?" I'm like, "Who am I to say no?"
Sick.
So yeah, I was able to. I drove a Zeekr mix around Shanghai for about an hour and a half. It's definitely a very interesting car. Probably the most interesting thing I've driven, maybe to date.
Wow.
Yeah. Tell me, is it
Right,
fast?
yeah.
Like what do you like about
It
it?
is crazy fast for starters.
Yeah.
It's got like I think 460 horsepower or something.
Yeah.
But it's only rear wheel drive, and it's like really heavy. But it's just kind of like I don't know if Rory, I don't know if you picked up on it. It's just like how nice that interior is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was, I mean,
That was
and
like
this is,
the
yeah.
fit and the quality, the choice of materials, like the tufted like door panels. I'm like,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, you guys went all out.
Yeah. This is the thing that keeps like getting my attention about these cars is it's like, you know, the widely discussed thing is like, oh, they charge really fast, they have a lot of power, you know, they have big
They're
range
nice
or whatever.
cars.
But they're so fucking nice, man. Like the nuts and bolts and like the way that they're put together and the way that they feel inside is like it's like
Very thoughtful.
yeah, and but just so like very thoughtful, but also just so like I think maybe thoughtful is the word. It's like everything that you touch, everything that you are going to be looking at feels premium and interesting in a way that like is just surprising. Like it's like
It's
you
surprising.
know,
It's like it's to me, especially with Zeekr, it's like you let your designers do their jobs.
yeah,
You know, you like there was a lot of consideration too, and that's just kind of I felt about like every Chinese vehicle that I got my hands on for the most part. Is that
yeah,
like some of these interactions were just so well considered and thoughtful, and it's like there's an attention to detail and attention to how these products will be used that I have not seen in automotive design in a while.
yeah,
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 because it just seems like so many modern cars of late. It seems like they're made by people who don't want to be there.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
And I did not get that vibe from a lot of these vehicles I got onto. It's just once again speaking of like well considered. You go back to the point where your question where you said like, what were some of the cars that you saw that were really interesting? Like I wasn't able to drive a Xiaomi SU7, but that car was also very interesting, but not in the ways that a lot of people are talking about. I like the Xiaomi SU7 mostly because it was so integrated into Xiaomi's other products that it was just kind of like, wow, this is something new. Like for example, they're sold in the Xiaomi stores. Like, for anybody who doesn't know, Xiaomi also sells like a lot of small electronics. They also they sell cell phones, they sell tablets, stuff like that. like for example, I was looking through. For starters, the Xiaomi store was absolutely packed. Um, then I'm just looking at all the accessories you can add. Like for example, if you want rear seat entertainment, what you would do is you would buy two off-the-shelf Xiaomi tablets and then plug them into the back of the seats. Like the car is already set up for stuff like that.
Nice.
Your phone can if you have a Xiaomi phone, it'll automatically mirror it onto the car's infotainment screen. If you have other Xiaomi stuff that are integrated into your house, let's say you're like your thermostat or whatever, you can control all that stuff from the car. It's that stuff like that, like that integration with tech, or the fact that it's like all integrated with China's tech companies that people use in other aspects of their life. We don't have that.
Yeah.
And it's actually useful and it works.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Not
I mean, I
feel like that's the difference.
yeah. I don't know how well it works, because I mean, I don't have like
Yeah.
a Xiaomi phone or a Xiaomi house or a
Right.
cool Huawei phone or anything. But the fact that it exists and the fact that people are buying it because of these things, because of these features, I don't know how do we catch up from that? How do we compete with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the big thing that stands out to me is like from the interior material standpoint, and then from like this integration stuff, it's like these are not cost things necessarily. It's not like, oh, I don't know how they're doing this because they're delivering this content at a lower cost. It's like they're just thinking more about it, and it's like,
Yeah.
and like whatever, we can probably do a breakdown of like what the interior cost between like a nice Hyundai and a Mercedes is, and it's the fact of the matter is it's not going to be that different. It's like
No.
it is.
If you've read some teardowns, there's a lot of teardowns of stuff in the U.S. where they're kind of like, yeah, I see how they made this cheaper. It's not out of the world. It's not like, oh my God, they're lying. It's just like, really, really smart use of materials.
Yeah.
That sort of thing,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that is the overall impression. I think like you and I texted when I was at Goodwood and kind of doing like walking around some cars, and I was like, oh my God, like this is a totally, it's not, there's nice for the price, right? Like, oh, this car is delivering a lot of value. And then there's just like, this is a really nice car. And like everything that I saw at every price point was like, this is just a really nice car. And like that.
Yep.
What is the price point of that mix? Do we know in China?
It's pricey. I want to say it's about 65 grand. I think it's not a cheap
$65,000.
car, but
Yeah.
also, let me look it up, because we've got
Yeah, we can.
Zeekr Live. Like, I want to say it's not a cheap car, because once again, Zeekr is a premium model
Mm-hmm.
or premium brand. Oh, maybe not. About 40 grand.
Yeah, that's fucking crazy. That's so insane. That's so.
But
insane.
I think the one that they had on display though was definitely like upper level model.
Yeah.
Because the one I drove in China was definitely a base model. It didn't have like little Stargate panel where you could put all the text on it.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna. I had a question about the mix. You wrote a story back in October about it where there was a line that struck me. You said in China, a vehicle is commonly considered a third space outside of the home in ways that are a little different from what we think here. For those in the West, the only time we spend extended time in our cars without driving them is if we're doing the tiny home thing or overlanding. And I was curious about that, about just that idea of the third space. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So when I was in China, I was talking to a few Westerners, and he says, during COVID really shook China in a lot of ways. Similar ways here, right? It was not safe to be indoors with a whole bunch of people.
Well,
so,
they actually did actual lockdowns for a really long time.
Right. Well, when people were finally able to socialize a little bit, they did kind of the same things we did. It's like, okay, well, let's just go outside. We're gonna do active stuff. And I guess partially the car market ended up changing it behind that too. People were excited. They wanted to go outdoors. They wanted to go, overlanding, campgrounds, that sort of thing. So that's why people started buying, crossovers and SUVs, unfortunately. Um, or in this case, spaces like the Zeekr Mix, where it's kind of like, okay, well, what if we took this thing camping to a campground? Like what would that kind of look like? So that's kind of where the mix came from, I was told.
Okay. Yeah. And there's also like that model of like the big kind of executive minivans too, where those are
Yep.
those are almost like corporate boardroom type spaces, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
What was the one they
Yeah,
had at
kind of like
CES? Zeekr had one at
yeah, so
CES.
it was a 009 Grand. So I've driven the regular 009, which has like it's basically like a 7-seat minivan. But the 009 Grand only seats 2 in the back.
oh right.
And yeah,
Yeah.
it's basically like a limo. I told some it felt like a Rolls Royce with sliding doors.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It has that
Now
crazy road
that one is
presence.
also that one is actually very expensive.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, it looked. I mean, the back seat of this thing is like, there's a space for the
Yeah,
driver up
it's
front.
It's like an
then there's
airplane
a-
back there. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
it's
a
$112,000.
Yeah, but the back seat is like this array of a huge screen that takes up the entire like front facing view.
Hmm.
And then there's like a smaller screen where you can like control whatever, but it's like you're seated in front of a massive computer screen and 2 like reclining like private jet type seats.
It also has 777 horsepower.
Yeah, insane.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's a
it's
43
actually
inch
funny.
screen in the back.
They had the regular version because Zeekr was trying to do some stuff for investors, and then they invited a handful of journalists. So they had a couple in New York about 3 years ago, 2 years
Mhm.
ago, and they let us track the standard version that has 589 horsepower. And I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of weird driving a van that fast.
Yeah.
Because it's really really fast. It'll go from 0 to 60 in like less than 4 seconds. But also like
Jesus.
corners weirdly flat.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but because it's super heavy, it doesn't stop all that well. But I'm just kind of like, man, if this thing had bigger brakes, can you imagine
Yeah.
just getting on a track and just getting hawked down by a minivan? Like,
it like listeners should go check out the Zeekr website for this card. Like the interior of this it's so funny because this is stuff like you were saying, Kevin. Like if you're looking at a Rolls Royce or a car in that class, you're talking about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for the
Mhm.
privilege. But this is like offering the same shit at 112 grand. And like honestly, like you have like these beautiful reclining leather perforated seats. You have this 43-inch, they call it the private intelligent curtain wall, which is the screen that sits in front of you. They have a refrigerator for hot and cold items, air conditioning, obviously, thank you, fragrance, a foyer vase, and other functions into one intelligent. Sorry, that's maybe just a mistranslation. Other functions in the curtain wall.
yeah.
You have these like crystal buttons and controls, like the hand controls are crystal. And then you have this like Himalayan raw stone trim, which is
Mhm.
actually like a stone piece, wool carpeting. I mean, this is like all Rolls Royce stuff, in a really really compelling and like spacious package. Like Rolls Royce would obviously never build a minivan like this.
Right.
But-
It's so weird because like Zeekr has so many like models I think would do really well in the United States. And as weird as I think the Mix and the 009 are, I also see them like, selling a handful of units if they were to come here,
Yeah. So what are like, if you were to say prognostication wise, like what are cars you've seen in China that you think like, I think like obviously like the Zeekr Mix is a very cool car to me. This is the 009 is a cool car to me. I like a Toyota Previa. I like, kind of like the utility, weird utility cars or whatever. But like, what are the things that you see that are like, okay, if you plug this in to the U.S. market tomorrow, not just from Zeekr, but for whoever, that you're
Cool.
like, this would sell.
So I would probably say the Neo ES6. I'm actually working on a first drive on that too. That's who I went with in November. It's just kind of tit for tat, the size of I'd say Lincoln MKC. Oh, they don't call it that anymore. Corsair. It's a little bigger than the Corsair, a little smaller than whatever is above the Corsair that I can't remember, that no one can remember, right? Nautilus. Yeah, there we go.
Nautilus, yeah. So this is like a largish mid-size crossover.
I would say it's more compact. I think Americans would read it as compact, but it's technically a little bigger than compact because Americans are pretty floaty with actual size categories, right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, the Neo ES6 would probably be a good one. Pretty much anything from Neo, honestly. I think their whole lineup would be solid here in the United States. Most of Zeekr's lineups, I would probably say the 007 sedan. It's funny, when I first started talking with Zeekr when they had their New York event, I asked them about the Zeekr X, which is kind of a subcompact crossover. It's on the same platform and same stuff as the Volvo EX30, which is in the United States now. And they says, "Oh, the Zeekr X is a little too small for American taste." I was like, "No, I think you should think again." I think a lot of people do like. You'd be surprised the amount of people who want something that's not huge, especially in the EV space. Another good one. I think Xpeng's stuff would also be good too. Probably the Xpeng G6 and maybe the X7 van. And then also the Xpeng Mona, which is like a small Model 3 size car, but it's a little more basic than the Model 3. That's the thing though. It's like I'm having a hard time narrowing down cars because everybody I've talked to in China, even the last people I talked to with Zeekr at CES, they kind of admitted that the Chinese tastes and the American tastes are kind of identical. So
that's that was one thing that struck me. Just it's so interesting because I feel like the way that American cars evolved over the through the decades. And the way that American cars are so different from European cars and Japanese cars, just traditionally, it's just because of the environment, right? It's like America is a big open space, and so we
is
have
China.
Long, giant cars, whereas European and Japanese manufacturers, they made small, compact cars for old, narrow streets. But China is a big open space too, and you see it in the cars. There are so many more just kind of like 5 meter plus cars, which are that's kind of in by the European standard, like that's a
huge.
big car. Like anything bigger than 5 meters, like that's not a viable proposition in those markets. But here it's like, that's what we do. We have fucking Escalades and shit. And it seems like China is kind of the same way. I mean, at least as far as their a lot of the manufacturer offerings, they're much more American scale.
Yeah, they love it. But I mean, like if you look at some of the early entries into China, I mean, the first couple brands to enter China when China opened up its borders were Volkswagen and Buick.
Right.
They were selling basically, localized versions of, for Volkswagen, it was the Quantum, which is called the Santana there. And then for Buick, it was the Century. So they stuck a Cavalier motor and a 5-speed manual and a Buick Century and sicked it on Chinese people, unfortunately. But they loved it. But but like that's they loved these big soft cars, which is at its core a lot what Americans like too. So honestly, I would say that just kind of like if you go to any brand and just kind of pick one, I feel like they would have a decent chance of doing okay in the United States. And I think that's what kind of freaks out both our government and other auto brands because they kind of know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's also sorry, Rory. I just like the fact that I mean, in the last 20 years or so, and we've talked about this, that American manufacturers have been chasing that kind of European ideal for so long, and like now we're actually pretty good at making like competitive European style cars, right?
Are we?
Well, I mean, you can argue like with Cadillac V Series cars or whatever. They're the equal of like a BMW sports sedan. But But what we've completely left open is just that big, soft, traditional American style vehicle. And I mean, it would be very funny if the Chinese like were the ones to, not only
Yeah.
is our tech just like 30 years ahead of everybody else's, but we're building the cars that Americans like
I think
historically.
now, I think not just, the fact that it's soft. I just want to say, like, I think Chinese brands are very good at figuring out what Chinese people want.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
know, for that market, because a lot of these cars, a handful of cars, when they leave China, they end up getting, like, retuned for European or other markets to make sure, like,
Yeah.
they meet the taste of other markets. But I think just in general, Chinese brands are really good at figuring out what Chinese people wanted. And
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of foreign brands, or Western brands, they just didn't really put in the work to understand what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I
Because
think
I'm not gonna lie, after that first China piece, and I started talking to some people at some like, higher up people at these bigger brands. I would talk about some of these brands I had experience with. I was like, hey, do you guys know about this? And they were just like, I don't know what that is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it bothers me because, like, you were selling hundreds and thousands of units in China for years on years on years, and you didn't know what was going on there. How did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is, it's like one of those things where it was an emerging market, right? And they were just like foisting old tech at a very low cost on people, and then like on the market, and then you saw like a substantial jump in like standard of living in China,
Mhm.
and like it was like, oh, you
Not
guys
have
just
tastes.
you guys don't want 20-year-old Buick chassis anymore, or like you don't want
Nope.
the Volkswagen Jetta from 40 years ago or whatever. Like,
Right,
um,
right.
yeah,
Like,
and
for
I
another good example, like, for example, so we were talking earlier about how China loves big executive vans, right? For a long
Yeah.
time, Buick, like, held that market down with
Yeah.
the GL8 van, which is essentially the Chevy Venture from the 90s with a
Yeah.
Buick
Yeah, right.
badge.
Yep.
And they had been selling it there. It had effectively been the same chassis that they kept just kind of like refreshing and refreshing and refreshing, until like last year, when, a lot of that market had started already gone electric or plug-in hybrid.
Yeah.
And here GM was, they didn't have an electric version of it until last year, or not even electric, a plug-in hybrid version of it until last year. And then just like now you have homegrown competitors, that are meeting the needs of Chinese people, and they're fully electric or plug-in hybrid or extended range electric vehicles. And you just are soldiering out that same 20-year-old, or actually probably more like 35-year-old venture van with a Buick badge on it.
Yeah.
I'm like, at that point, like, whose fault is this?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think too, like, I guess we've talked about it, but like we've seen Chinese consumers just totally walk away from those brands in favor of homegrown cars, right? Like that.
Yep. I wouldn't say totally, but it is definitely a lot. They're definitely shrinking back, And
Yeah.
that's also something that gets me too. Because, like, even with like a sales drop for some of these Western brands, they're still moving, like, thousands of units here.
Yeah.
They're just not moving as many.
Well, the trend seems to be like in toward the Chinese
Right.
product, right? Yeah.
Kevin,
Yeah.
I
Go
actually
ahead.
I had a question about something struck me when we were talking about like the sort of sizing and design kind of taste being similar between China and the US. What kind of feel did you get in, because this is like a massive issue that we run into here. I was wondering if it's better in China. What was the vibe you got in Beijing about like the interaction of cars of that kind of size and like pedestrians and cyclists and other people not in the car?
I would like to say it's better, but I do think that is a definite, like, concern. Part of it is better is because, like, so you can't actually, so in China, pickup trucks are considered commercial vehicles. So you can't
Cool.
just like drive them like we do here in the United States. But even still, I do think there's kind of like an upper limit to some of these vehicles. There are a lot of bigger vehicles, but also, like, I don't think there's, like, the average suburban or, Ford Expedition kind of rolling around Beijing,
Right.
like how we do have, like, they're kind of a big
Right.
ubiquitous here, right? But I'm not gonna lie and say that everything's all hunky dory.
Yeah.
Like I do think there's probably a lot of like, pedestrian safety issues that come with, everybody driving big ass vehicles
Mm,
or big ass high profile SUVs.
yeah.
But I do think it's better.
Yeah.
And also like everything is a kind of a strode in China, which is for better or worse kind of sucks. I
Mm,
mean, like everything's like a 4-lane road. It's just instead of it being single family houses on either side, it's like a big ass high rise because there's so many
Yeah.
people.
right, right, right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Right.
What
And
about
there
Tesla in
are
China? Go ahead. Finish your
and
thought.
there are like, other methods of transport. 'Cause I mean,
Mhm.
like even getting a license or excuse me, getting a car in a lot of big Chinese cities is like it's a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
they have plate lotteries.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why electric cars caught on is because I think if you were to get an EV plate, if you were to get a plate from the EV plate lottery, you didn't have to pay the registration. You didn't have to pay for like the plate would be free
Nice.
or significantly reduced versus like one for a gas car is like sometimes upwards of $10,000
Mm-hmm.
US.
So
Wow.
the um the last kind of American or like Western brand I think that like really had like some cachet and interest in China seems to have been Tesla, right? Like that was a hot
Mhm.
product 5-8 years ago. What is the status of Tesla now, like vis-a-vis like the Chinese brands?
I think it's hot. Well, I'll put it this way. I think they still have a little bit of cachet, but also like they're losing it kind of fast. Partially because I think just they're not updating their model line.
Mm,
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem because Chinese brands move so fast. They're constantly updating their model lines, probably too fast sometimes. Like I feel like maybe they should slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
But China or Tesla really hasn't done too much. Like they updated the Model 3, called it's called the Model 3 Plus, and sales of it haven't been great,
Yeah.
um, compared to like other sedans in its class. Um, Same with the Model Y. Like the Model Y is still selling decently, but if you look at it, it's kind of like they have a lot of like sales incentives to get people in the door.
Mhm.
Like they're offering 0% financing in China. They're doing like,
Wow.
yeah.
they're doing trade-in incentives, like come in and we'll give you extra some odd dollars on your trade-in to get you in the door. Stuff like that.
How's
Yeah.
the
So like, I mean,
Cybertruck
it's
doing?
right. I mean, they're still getting sales, but I don't know how sustainable that
Yeah.
is. Especially since like, it's I was talking to another guy. He runs a China car channel called China Driven. And he's just like, I don't think any one competitor is going to take down the Model Y. It's just
Yeah.
going to be more like death from a thousand cuts, which I
Mm,
agree with. Back in 2019 when the Model Y dropped, there really weren't that many competitors yet. Um, but I think now it's 2025. There's a lot of choices. Both Chinese domestic as well as like foreign competitors that are halfway decent. That might be a little more tailored to what people are looking for now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe,
I mean, I think
yeah.
I think you can see the influence of Tesla that I think that like maybe 5 years ago it was looked at as kind of like the thing to emulate, right? Because so many of the kind of Chinese cars have they adopted that kind of center vertical screen interior design language and but but it seems like you can also just tell that like just when you look at each new product that's coming out and it's like okay well they've adopted that design language but they've also
Mhm.
like surpassed it in like 1,000
yeah.
ways right whereas
Yeah,
Tesla's just been like
it
treading
keeps.
water for
Yeah, they're making the same
a
car. I
decade
mean, the Model Y really hasn't changed much.
no
I mean,
exactly
if I were a Model Y leaseholder and my lease was out, what's the point of upgrading? Like, what am I going to
exactly
get in this? I mean, just buy the same car again?
right
No, that's
and,
boring.
and especially in China where you have like
So many
two
choices.
dozen other better
Yeah.
choices where it's like
Right,
yeah
right.
um I
I
guess
still go ahead, Peter.
well you go ahead with yours because the question that I had was more of a kind of just general summing up kind of cultural question
No, go ahead.
so
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah, let me hear it.
okay well just yeah like I say I mean this is more of a big picture question that I just want to ask just as somebody who has been to China in the last, couple of years, a few times. Um, I feel like, uh, I mean, definitely the vibe of this podcast of these three people, and perhaps you as well, Kevin. And most of the people that I know, I feel like in the U.S. there is this kind of just general sense of just to understate it, pessimism. Um, you could also call it apocalypticism. I mean,
Mm.
it feels like the end of the world, right? And in a lot of ways. And I sometimes have to step back and remind myself that it's like, well, actually, there are places on the earth where I don't think people have that sense.
Hmm.
And and when I think about that, foremost among them, I just like everything that I see coming out of China. It speaks to me of um, just a real optimism. Like I feel like that's
That's
the last place
Yeah.
in the world where people
that's
are
how I felt
excited
too.
about the future,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And and that and things that we kind of regard as just like, oh no, we're done, climate change or whatever. These are insoluble problems, and we're all doomed. I feel like maybe they just look upon them as just like, no, these are challenges to be met, and we're working towards
Yep.
them. And so maybe you could just speak. I mean, is that a correct read? Does
I
that
think
does
it's
that
I
jive
think it's a
with
very
your experience?
I think that's a very correct read. Once again, I feel like I learned the most in China when I was alone.
Yeah.
Not having like this isn't like, some PR person or a CCP agent, trying to tell me what to do, right? Just kind of walking around and seeing how like excited people were. Like that's what got me. Like when I was looking at the Xiaomi SU7 and I was in the Xiaomi store, once again, just watching people excited for this thing. You know, the car had been out for like a few months already, or maybe like 2 months already. And there's still like a line on a rainy Sunday to get into the store. There are people like taking selfies with it. They're going up to the Xiaomi workers and asking them like, "Hey, how does this work? You know, how much does this cost?" People were excited to be there. They're excited to buy these things. They're excited to see this stuff, and there's a real optimism there that I haven't seen since like early Tesla. Before we learned that Elon Musk was crazy. Back when Tesla stores used to be in malls, and it was so cool to see the gold wing doors of the Model X, even if they were kind of stupid. But the fact that a car did that stuff was like, wow, that's so cool.
Mm.
And every place was like that. Like there were so many, even outside the Xiaomi store. I went to like a Zeekr store and it was similar. I went to a Li Auto store and it was absolutely slammed. I went to a Huawei store to look at some of their cars. Yes, Huawei also sells like cars as well. And like the attendant helped put the software in English so I could figure it out so I could play around the car myself, which was very nice of him to do that. But just like there's so much optimism, there's so much like excitement, and it's stuff that we have not seen here. Like I can't imagine going into a dealership and being excited about anything. I tried to lease a car. I was going to lease a Hyundai Ioniq 5 a few weeks ago, and
Yeah.
just like the process was horrible.
Yeah.
The process was terrible. I didn't really like the car. I ended up just like walking away because I just didn't feel comfortable paying so much money per month on a car I only half liked.
Yeah.
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 You know,
Yeah. It definitely feels like I mean, I think part of like the feeling of lack of optimism for me is like just watching the world and China specifically kind of leave us behind, where it's like it's just it's like talking to Kevin, reading those reviews, and what you can see trickling out of China. It feels very much, it's like even a year or two ago, I'd have been like, yeah, this is a lot of gimmicky, weird shit. That's like they're just doing a lot of products that like seem kind of zany to me, or like yeah, of course everyone's thought of that, but it's silly. Why would you do that? You know what I mean? Like, but now it's like there's a maturity to it where it's like, oh no, this is just like
yeah,
20 years in the future. Like,
Yeah, that's what gets me, because I feel like a lot of Chinese car content and coverage revolves around, that these cars are inherently cheap, so they're good value.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's part of it, but I've been trying to tell people, it's like, I think Chinese buyers and buyers across the globe, they're shifting from buying these cars because they're cheap and available, but because they're actually like desirable.
yeah,
Yeah.
Like if Zeekr sold any of their cars here, I'd probably buy one. Like,
Yeah.
full stop.
yeah.
You know?
It really, any of those cars are massively appealing. The three that they had.
Yeah.
In the, I mean, we didn't even talk about the 007 and like the insane performance that they were talking about, and like
You mean
Nürburgring
the 001?
times and 001. Sorry, yeah.
They
Yeah.
had that. I was upset that that's actually the only Zeekr I haven't driven.
Yeah.
Because they had when I went to Beijing for the Beijing Auto Show, they had basically kind of like a showcase of all the Geely Group cars except for Volvo and Polestar. And then that car was actually the lead car for the lead follow group
Yeah.
that we were doing on the track. And it was running all day. So by the time they started letting people drive it, it ran out of charge.
Yeah.
So
it's
but
really
but also like
handsome.
it was going flat out all day. So like, hats off to them.
Yeah. Really a pretty car. I mean, I think like one too, like for listeners to pull up the website and check out the interior and like the exterior design of the car. And then like the performance is crazy. I was really struck, Kevin, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on this too, and we'll let you go soon. But going to that Zeekr press conference that I think we were both at, the mood, like it was a long, boring press conference for the most part, but it was fucking packed, and like everybody was paying attention, and like there were people standing in the aisles, standing in the entryway behind the big stage, like what does that say, like versus anything else that you went to at CES, like the level of excitement around those cars and that brand?
It tells me, so it's funny because I heard from one of them, I was talking to them at their booth, and he says, yeah, we were really surprised. We only thought there were going to be like maybe 10 or 15 reporters.
Yeah.
And then they got like, and then they got like this huge response. I think they're going to try it in the United States. That's what I think.
I think so too.
Yeah, how
inevitable.
How inevitable. I mean, I feel like there are, I mean, there's all the trade war talk and the tariff talks, and we can't let this happen. I feel like it is both inevitable that these cars will make it here, and two, that when they do, it will, to call it a disruption, maybe would be soft pedaling it. But I mean,
they're pretty much everybody everywhere else. Like Zeekr, I think also they've actually opened up in Mexico now.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
they're literally
how
everywhere
long,
but here.
Yeah, how long can the U.S. U.S. manufacturers, U.S. Government officials, how long can they stave off the inevitable, I guess?
Yeah.
I don't know. Question. I wish I had a better answer for that. I feel like anytime I think I know what's going to happen, something stupid happens and I don't know.
Yeah.
Like for example, the first time I went to China, the day I landed, they implemented the 100% tariff on Chinese EVs.
Right.
And then the second time I went to China, I went on November 6th.
So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the day after the election. So like, my questions changed from, hey, what's your plans for the U.S.? It's like, so what now?
Yeah.
So just kind of like rewriting all my ideas. But I don't know if or how they're gonna stop or let in Chinese vehicles. It's just kind of like, we'll just have to see when we get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I don't think anybody knows, including the Western automakers, because there's a lot of entanglement between Chinese automakers and Western ones, either intentionally or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think
kind of like,
everybody I've talked to, the thing though is that the limit here is not like, oh, I wonder if people would be interested in this car. It's like, will they be allowed to sell cars here?
Yep.
And I think like
exactly.
It's pure protectionism. It's like, look, we know if they are, and it is interesting to me because I think like all of us probably like either on the pod or individually have talked about this in the past, but it's like I am a big skeptic of the U.S. market for EVs, just because the groundwork that China has done, that other countries have done to like incentivize buying them and make it easy to own them, has still not been done here. So like Chinese EVs would be entering a market with incredibly appealing product at a very low price point, comparatively, probably. But there's still no charging infrastructure. It's still hard to own an EV in the United States compared to other places. So I do wonder, like, like in my head, it's like, oh yeah, a massively appealing car sold at like a very cheap price point, like that's a slam dunk. That'll happen. But again, it's like you do wonder, like would that move? And I wonder too, like if Chinese automakers are thinking about that, like what does the infrastructure picture look like? Yeah.
I would like to think I'm a little more positive. I would like to think that, these cars are compelling enough to like, they can kind of will infrastructure into it, like how Tesla did in a way. Tesla made this really cool, iPhone, Apple-esque looking car, and people buy it because like it's cool. Like I would wager that a lot of people, Tesla owners, probably didn't even know they were electric at first, right? But because comparatively, I feel like a lot of EVs on the American market just kind of like there's just got kind of like a little bit unsatisfying,
Yeah.
And I would like to think that some of these Chinese manufacturers, if they were to come in with the right, balance of desirability for their products, that people would figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah. And it's like not outside the realm of possibility too that they could come in and fund some infrastructure.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Wow, straight from China. Wow, I'm calling the police.
Yeah.
They're gonna send us engineers like Cuba sends doctors. Like, dig. These people need a shovel. Dig.
Maybe,
cash
we can
in your
join BRICS.
CCP checker, huh? Oh God.
I mean, I think there is
maybe we get included. Maybe we get some Belt and Road initiative loans or something.
Oof. Oof.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the conclusion that a lot of American manufacturers have come to, is that like if they're going to have infrastructure, like there's some government money for it, but like they're going to have to do it themselves. And China could do the same thing here, conceivably. Weird to think about. All right, anything else? Kevin, do you have anything to plug? Your socials?
Oh yeah.
Follow me on all the socials. So Blue Sky, Twitter. I'm not calling it X. Threads, Instagram. Gaytona _USA or Gaytona USA.
Such a good handle, by the way.
It is. I will never give it up. Sometimes like maybe I should change to something more professional. No, we're keeping this. Gaytona USA on any of the apps. It's probably me. TikTok. RIP, but that's same thing.
For another week.
Yeah.
I get it while it's hot.
I have nothing to plug right now. I'm just kind of trying to catch up on this China stuff. So so behind.
Thank you for taking the time. I know you are unlike all three of us, you're a very busy journalist with work.
Oh God.
But yeah, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again.
Yeah, this was super fun.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Can we get a stay tired out of you? That's our sign off.
We stay tired.
Stay tired.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stay tired, guys.
Awesome. Yeah. Stay tired.
Thank you, Kevin.